Hello and welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, poet, walker and author of Cromwell in verse tied to touring poetry. This is a podcast for people who suspect, as I do, that the world is moving too quickly and that something quietly extraordinary waits for anyone willing to slow down, listen closely and pay proper attention to it. In every episode, I share two poems. The first is a guest poem from the wider world of verse, something that has stayed with me or troubled me or refused to let me go. The second is one of my own, drawn from the moors, the coast, the weather, and the strange beauty of ordinary days. And for your chance to win a signed copy of Cromwell in verse tied to touring poetry, which is available to buy at Amazon, I invite you to suggest a future guest poem by emailing me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. The next guest poem will come from one of you. Today, we are exploring a theme that has settled in my mind every time I have walked through an old, granite-faced town and felt the centuries pressing in from every side. Some places do not raise their voices. They simply keep speaking. In Cornwall in particular, in the slate grey streets, chapels and shadowed prison walls of a town like Bodmin, the past has not gone anywhere. It is held in stone. It is woven through the moss. It surfaces in the names of the streets and the silence of the railway sidings and the smugglers' tracks that still run faintly across the moor. This is not a town that puts on a performance of its history. It does something quieter and arguably harder. It simply continues. We're going to sit with that idea this week, beginning in an 18th century country churchyard with Thomas Gray, where the unremembered village dead lie sleeping beneath their unread headstones, and then crossing, in the second half, onto Bodmin Moor itself, where the granite still holds the tales the world has chosen to forget. So pour something warm, settle in, the wind is up, the light is going, and there is poetry to be found. Today we start our journey with perhaps the most famous reflection on the quiet, unheralded lives of the past. Thomas Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is a cornerstone of English literature, but more than that, it is a masterclass in looking at the landscape, not just for its beauty, but for the human stories buried beneath its surface. It was published in 1751, but its resonance has never faded. I can imagine Gray sitting in the twilight of Stoke Pogies, much like I might sit on a bench overlooking the dales, watching the light fail and the shadows of the past lengthen. So here is the poem in full. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly over the lea. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way, and leaves the world to darkness and to me. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. Save that from wonder I've a mantle tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain of such, as wandering near her secret bower, molest her ancient solitary reign. Beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell for ever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. The breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from the straw-built shed, the cock's shrill clarion or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lowly bed. For them no more the blazing hearth shall burn, or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield, their furrow oft the stubborn glebe has broke. How jocund did they drive their team afield, how bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke. Let not ambition mock their useful toll, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth ever gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Nor you, ye proud, impute to these the fault, if memory over the tomb no trophies raise, where through the long-drawn aisle and fretted vault the pealing anthem swells the note of praise. Can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? Can honour's voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull cold ear of death? Perhaps in this neglected spot is laid some heart once pregnant with celestial fire, hands that the rod of empire might have swayed, or wake to ecstasy the living lyre. But knowledge to their eyes her ample page, rich with the spoils of time, did never unroll. Chill penury repressed their noble rage, and froze the genial current of the soul. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen, and waste its sweetness on the desert air. Some village Hampden, that with dauntless breast the little tyrant of his fields withstood. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. The applause of listening senates to command, the threats of pain and ruin to despise, to scatter plenty over a smiling land, and read their history in a nation's eyes. Their lot forbade, nor circumscribed alone their growing virtues, but their crimes confined, forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne, and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. The struggling pangs of conscience truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenious shame, or heat the shrine of luxury and pride, with incense kindled at the muses' flame. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool sequestered vale of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. Yet even these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorial still erected nigh, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. Their name, their years, spelt by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and elegy supply, and many a holy text around she strews, that teach the rustic moralist to die. For who, to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being ever resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. On some fond breast the parting soul relies, some pious drops the closing eye requires, even from the tomb the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes live their wonted fires. For thee, who mindful of the unhonoured dead, dost in those lines their artless tale relate, if chance by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire thy fate. Haply some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away, to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. There at the foot of yonder nodding beech, that wreathes its old fantastic root so high. His listless length at noontide would he stretch, and pour upon the brook that babbles by. Hard by yon wood, now smiling as in scorn, muttering his wayward fancies he would rove, now drooping, woeful wan, like one forlorn, or crazed with care, or crossed in hopeless love. The Epitaph. Here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair science frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. Large was his bounty, and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely send. He gave his to misery all he had a tear. He gained from heaven, 'twas all he wished a friend. No fathers seek his merits to disclose, or draw his frailties from their dread abode. There they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. This poem, though hundreds of years old, feels incredibly modern in its empathy. Gray is looking at the graves of people whose names weren't in the history books at the time. He talks about some mute inglorious Milton, or some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. He is suggesting that within the unglamorous documentation of a village graveyard lies the potential of the entire human race. It's a reminder that greatness is often a matter of opportunity, but worth is inherent in every life. When I walk through the churchyards of North Yorkshire, from the high moors down to the coastal cliffs, I feel this solemn stillness. I see those rugged elms and yew trees shade, and I realise that my job as a poet is to be the one who does not mock their useful toil. Gray uses the landscape as a bridge to the human soul. He starts with the sensory, the beetle's drone, the tinkling of the sheep's bells, and moves into the philosophical. He challenges the proud and the grand to recognise that the paths of glory lead only to the same destination as the paths of the ploughman. This is the ultimate levelling of the field. For me, the most touching part is the end, where he imagines a hoary-headed swain describing the poet himself. It reminds us that we are all eventually part of the landscape and the folklore of a place. We are all graved on the stone beneath yon aged thorn. This poem sets the stage for our discussion today because it is, in itself, an act of research and reflection. It is a document of a specific place and a specific class of people who, without Gray's intervention, might have remained mute forever. Moving from the churchyards of the south to the rugged, granite-bound heart of Cornwall, I want to share a piece from my own collection, Cornwall in Verse, tied to touring poetry. This poem is called Bodmin. I wrote this after spending a considerable amount of time walking the streets of that town, feeling the weight of its dual history, the sacred and the carceral. Bodmin is a place where the mist seems to have a memory of its own. It is a town built of granite, a stone that doesn't just sit, it endures. It carries the marks of the prison, the echo of the steam trains, and the ancient silence of the Moor. Here is Bodmin. Grey stone and mist where legends lie, the moor breathes low beneath the sky. A chapel bell, a prison gate, time walks these streets with measured gait. The wind recalls the rebels' tread, where saints and smugglers once were led. The granite walls hold tales unsaid, of justice, faith, and quiet dread. A market hum, a railway's ghost, the Bodmin line no longer boasts. Yet memory rides where engines slept, and voices echo what was kept. In Bodmin's heart the past still stirs, in moss and slate in whispered slurs, a town that holds its truths in stone, and sings them softly all alone. When I look at these lines now, I'm struck by that phrase, a town that holds its truths in stone. In Bodmin, you can't escape the history. The Bodmin prison looms over the tower, a monument to a very different kind of quiet than the one Gray describes. It's a quiet born of confinement and judgment. But then you have the chapel bells and the saints of the Cornish landscape. There's a tension there between the justice of the law and the faith of the people. The mention of the railway's ghost refers to the old Bodmin and Wadebridge Railway, one of the oldest in the world. When you walk the camel trail now, you are walking on the bones of an industrial revolution that transformed this quiet corner of the world. The whispered slurs in the final stanza isn't a reference to insults, but to the way time blurs the edges of things, the way the moss grows over the slate, the way names on a headstone soften until they are just suggestions of sound. Bodmin doesn't shout at you about its history like a tourist map. It sings it softly, all alone, for those who are willing to listen to the granite. And now it's on to our discussion segment. And the theme of today's episode is that some places do not raise their voices, they simply keep speaking. This brings us to a topic that is very close to my heart and central to my process as a writer, the deep, often unglamorous research that happens before a single line of poetry is ever put to paper. Many people think of poetry as a sudden bolt of lightning, an inspiration that strikes while looking at a sunset. And while that happens, for me the most profound poems are born in the dusty silence of archives, in the turning of fragile parish records, and in the passionate, detailed newsletters of local history societies. And I also enjoy reading geological surveys. Let's talk about the literature of unglamorous documentation. What do I mean by that? I mean the census returns from 1841, the parish registers of baptisms and burials, the land enclosure maps, and the minutes of long-defunct town councils. These are not literary texts in the traditional sense. They weren't written to be beautiful. They were written to be accurate, to track taxes, to record property, or to manage the poor. But to a poet, these are the primary colours of human existence. When you open a parish record from a small Yorkshire village in the 1700s, you aren't just looking at names. You are looking at the rhythm of a community. You see a year where the burials far outnumber the baptisms, and you realise you are looking at the physical evidence of a harsh winter or an outbreak of smallpox. You see the names of occupations that no longer exist, the night soil men, the fustian cutters, the wallers. These words have a texture. They bring a specific weight to a poem that imagination alone can't provide. Researching a place is an act of respect. Before I wrote Bodmin, or any of the poems in Tighter Tor, I felt an obligation to understand what the ground had witnessed. If I'm writing about a tour, I need to know who walked it when it wasn't a place for weekend hikers. Who were the people who saw it as a place of labour, of danger, or of sustenance? This is where local history societies come in. I cannot speak highly enough of these groups. They are usually composed of volunteers who have spent decades obsessively documenting their own few square miles of the earth. They know which house used to be the blacksmith's. They know why a certain path is called the Coffin Way. They have scanned the old photographs of men in flat caps standing outside a pub that was demolished in 1962. When you read their journals, often printed on simple paper with hand-drawn maps, you are entering a deep well of collective memory. This is the unhonoured dead that Gray spoke of, finally receiving their due through the meticulous care of their descendants. There is a specific thrill in finding a glitch in the documentation. I remember looking at a record of a local court and seeing a woman fined for scolding in the street. In that one entry, a whole character is born. Why was she scolding? Who was she scolding? The archive gives you the skeleton, and the poetry provides the flesh and the breath. But why do this? Why not just write about how the mist looks? Because a place is more than its geography. A place is a layered experience of time. If you ignore the history, you are only writing about the skin of the world. By digging into the archives, you find the literature of the everyday. There is a poem in a 19th century list of lost property found on a railway platform. There is a poem in the inventory of a farmer's kitchen after he passed away. 6 pewter spoons, a butter churn, a Bible. These objects are the anchors of our humanity. The challenge for the poet is how to take this unglamorous data and transform it into something that sings. You don't want the poem to read like a history textbook. You want the research to be the ghost in the machine. In Bodmin, I mentioned the rebel's tread. That wasn't just a poetic flourish, it was a nod to the prayer book rebellion of 1549, which had significant roots in that area. You don't need to know the dates, 1549, to feel the weight of the word rebel when it's paired with granite. The research provides the authority. It allows the poet to speak with a voice that is grounded in the truth of the soil. I often think of the archivist as a kind of priest of memory. They handle the physical remains of our past. There is something deeply moving about the smell of an archive, the scent of old glue, decaying leather, and cold stone. It forces you to slow down. You can't scroll through a 300-year-old ledger. You have to wait for the page to be turned. You have to adjust your eyes to the faded ink. This physical slowing down is the perfect preparation for writing poetry. It moves you out of the frantic digital present and into the noiseless tenor of the past. For anyone listening who wants to write about their own home or a place they love, I encourage you to go beyond the surface. Visit your local record office. Join the Historical Society. Read the boring books about local geology or industrial heritage. You will find that the more you know about the unglamorous facts, the more glamorous and profound your poetry will become. You will start to see that the stone walls aren't just boundaries. They are the work of hands that had names, families and dreams. You will see that the railway's ghost isn't just a metaphor, but a memory of a Tuesday afternoon in 1890 when the first train puffed into the station and changed everything. The past is not dead, it's not even past, as Faulkner said. It's just waiting for someone to read the records and give it a voice again. This is why we research, not to live in the past, but to understand the depth of the present, to acknowledge that we are part of a long, continuing conversation between the people and the land. Gray knew this in his churchyard, and I hope I captured a sliver of it in Bodmin. The records are there, the stories are waiting, and the stone is always speaking. And so we come to the end of another walk together. We have stood with Thomas Gray in his country churchyard, listening to the curfew toll at the end of the day. and we have walked the granite streets of Bodmin, where the chapel and the prison still stand within sight of one another, and the past has not finished happening. Some places, as we said, do not raise their voices. They simply keep speaking. The voices are not loud, but they are not gone, and they are not silent. They are waiting for the kind of listener who knows the difference between an empty quiet and a held one. So now I would love to hear from you. If there is a poem you would like featured in a future episode, a classic, something modern, or a personal favourite you have carried with you for years, please email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That is aldencarrow78@gmail.com. Every suggestion is entered into the draw for a signed copy of Cromwell in verse tied to Tour in poetry, which will be sent to you by hand. The next guest poem will come from one of you, and that is precisely how I want this podcast to work. Not as a voice raised across the noise, but as a quieter conversation between people who have learned the value of listening. So thank you for listening, for slowing down with me, and for being willing to attend to what does not insist on being heard. Until next time, may you find poetry waiting for you in the everyday, and I look forward to speaking to you again on Wednesday.